Hi everyone. In this video we're going to take a quick look at the GPS and other positioning settings that are available in Leapfrog Aspect. To get to the positioning settings, we have to open up the main menu and go to the settings panel, which is the third icon over on the right, on the top right corner, and it looks like a little gear. So I'm going to tap on that, and that's going to bring up our settings panel. And right at the top are all of our positioning options under GPS mode. So the default is off, and that just sets you in the middle of your data at the highest altitude. So not really useful except for looking at your data and making sure that things are actually showing up, but they don't put you in any reasonable spot. Next option down is the GPS on. So this is going to use the GPS inside the device and position you according to the output from that. And it's usually decently accurate, particularly if you're in an area that you don't have an actual known coordinate position for more accurate instrumentation or anything like that. Within this GPS on mode are a couple of subsettings. There's a GPS altitude, which is turned on by default. And what that means is that it's going to use the altitude that's fed to it by the GPS receiver. And in consumer grade devices or in GPS in general, the altitude is usually the least accurate of the three axes. So in this case, you kind of have to hope for the best with your GPS altitude. One of the other settings in here is this WGS offset over to the right, and what that does is the output from the GPS receiver on the device is in the WGS ellipsoid for altitude, and typically mines and other altitude measurements are done in mean sea level, which is not the same ellipsoid as WGS. So in other words, you might have a slightly different known altitude at your position than what the GPS is reporting. And you can either calculate this using an online calculator to find what the WGS offset should be for your position, or you can just kind of eyeball it. If you have the GPS mode turned on in the app, it's going to report out what your altitude is based on the GPS, and if it doesn't match what you know the altitude to be, you can do the math to figure out what the offset should be and plug that into this panel. The other option is to use a constant altitude. And what this means is if you're in a mine or if you're somewhere where it's a constant altitude and you know what that altitude is, you should definitely use this value because it's going to fix you at that altitude. It's still going to get your easting and northing from the GPS, but it's going to force you to be at a constant altitude, which is really handy. And one point to note over on the right is where you would set the value of the altitude. So if you're on a bench of altitude 80, you put 80 in there. One thing to keep in mind is if you're on a bench of altitude 80, you also have to account for your own height. So you might put in something like 82 or 81.5 or something like that. And this is all in meters. So you have to go by that. Um, the next option in here is to do a manual coordinate entry. So this is really simple. If you know where you are, you would just key in coordinate values here. And this is useful if you're going to be someplace where GPS is sparse. Maybe you're in a really deep open pit or something like that, or you're underground and you just don't have good GPS coverage, but you know where you are based on a survey point or something like that. You can type in those values and it's going to put you right there. Alternatively, you can use the QR code mode, and this turns on a little QR code function in the main viewer. And similar to the manual function, it's just going to force you to be at a point. It doesn't dynamically update as you move around, but as long as you're snapping QR codes wherever you are that have your coordinate position, the app is going to adjust accordingly. And you can generate QR codes for the app on our website, leapfrog3d.com. We have a QR code generator just for this, and it's a really handy thing to do if you're going to be going to the same kind of survey point over and over again. If you're going to go to the same location, maybe an overlook or something like that, or anything underground. If you have a survey station, you can use it. You can put a QR code placard there, and every time you go to that spot, you just scan the QR code, and it's going to position you. Anything you scan from the QR code goes into the manual settings. So if you do want to adjust anything from the QR code, you can go back into the manual settings and adjust your position from there. One thing to point out also with the QR code, that when you're generating the QR codes, you're going to want to make sure that you account for your height, just like when you're doing the manual altitude, or if you're doing the constant altitude from the GPS. GPS on, you're going to want to make sure that you account for your height above whatever bench or altitude you're standing on. That's pretty much it for the positioning. I hope this helps.